Hello YouTube. The Elder Scrolls universe is famous for having deep lore as a background to the events of the different games, and our playtime in the games is often preceded by a set of instigating events leading to the situation as we find it in the game. For Skyrim, a pivotal moment in the history leading up to our playtime is the duel between Ulfric Stormcloak, the Jarl of Windhelm, and the High King of Skyrim, Torygg, who would end up dead after said duel, killed by Ulfric, which took place just a few months before our playtime begins. But who exactly was Torygg and why did Ulfric kill him? We'll delve into that and more after the intro. So, High King Torygg. He's an essential figure to the plot of Skyrim in that his death at the hands of Ulfric Stormcloak in their infamous duel for the High Kingship officially started the Stormcloak Rebellion. But while Stormcloak supporters paint him as a weak king who did nothing while Skyrim bled, and Imperial supporters paint him as some sort of perfect High King who did nothing wrong and was unceremoniously murdered by Ulfric, there's a bit more to his story which is both told and hinted at in the game, and a bit more nuance. Now, in fact, his story very much starts with his father, High King Istlod, the old High King of Skyrim who is credited with holding Skyrim and its Jarls together and united during the time of the Great War. It was Istlod who was king during the Great War and Istlod who was king when the White Gold Concordat was signed. In fact, in the canon Skyrim board game we even meet him and we learn that this art actually represents King Istlod, which is very cool. That being said, Istlod was old, experienced and highly respected by all the Jarls. From our interactions with him during the board game we can glimpse that he was the kind of ruler who tried to do right by the people. He was even willing to secretly break the White Gold Concordat and let a group of blades go free after the order to arrest all the blades had been given after the signing of the White Gold Concordat, which ended the Great War. It's clear to see why the Jarls respected him as king. In fact, even Ulfric says that Istlod was a good king. But by the end of the Great War, Istlod was already of an advanced age, and in the subsequent years after the war, Istlod died and Torygg, his son, became the Jarl of Solitude, but not yet High King. You see, when a High King dies in Skyrim, there's a bit of a complicated and convoluted path towards succession. As in general, what would happen is that the Jarls of Skyrim will convene in a so-called moot. They come together and they make a vote on whoever they think is most capable to lead the province as High King. Usually they choose then from the eligible members of the royal family, so the title doesn't necessarily go towards whomever is the firstborn of the lost king or queen. Rather, it seems that all children and other relatives of the current king or queen are able to be voted on. If there's no legitimate heir, the Jarls will instead choose a new king from amongst themselves. It's also possible for the Jarls to actually call for a moot to choose from amongst themselves instead of a relative of the current king, if a High King or Queen or prospective High King or Queen breaks one of Skyrim's laws or traditions. This is actually important for later on. Now it seems that in the 3rd and 4th era the process is even a little bit more different, because the Emperor, either the Septim or the Mead Emperor, would usually pick a candidate, generally from amongst the royal family of Solitude, and propose this candidate to the moot, which over time seems to have become a bit of a rubber stamp, and usually the candidate selected by the Emperor would become High King. But the moot still does have power, as from dialogue from both Legate Ricca and General Tullius we can infer that the moot is still a very important mechanism that the Empire does respect, meaning that they most likely, if the moot turns down a candidate, they will select a new candidate to be brought forward. Now, after High King Istlod died, Torygg, his at the time quite young son, was put forward to serve as his successor, and this moot, which included all the Jarls, including Ulfric, convened to vote on him. And at this moot it said that Ulfric advocated for Skyrim's independence in front of the other Jarls, including Torygg. One of Torygg's closest aides from at the time said that at this moot, Torygg highly respected Ulfric for his views on independence and his views on the Empire, and that by the end of the moot, Torygg was chosen as his father's successor, most likely then with the promises of being an independent voice for Skyrim within the Empire, a voice which would clearly define Skyrim's priorities and would not just blindly agree with anything the Empire did, just as his father had been essentially. At least, like I said in my video on Ulfric's perspective on Skyrim's story, that's the only way that he would have probably been able to get Ulfric's vote. But once he became the High King, he didn't seem to have been able to handle the responsibilities too well, as many, even some Imperial supporting characters, say that Torygg wasn't too great of a High King. He was faced with a difficult political situation of smoldering feelings of independence and discontent among the Jarls, primarily Ulfric, who was building his own private army right under the High King's nose and the Empire's nose, and he had to deal with an empire which was rebuilding after the Great War and required great amounts of resources to rebuild. He was essentially put between a rock and a hard place. Maybe his father, Istlod, with all his experience and the trust and respect of the other Jarls, even Ulfric had his respect, would have been able to keep navigating these waves, but Torygg was young, inexperienced and not very charismatic. It's said that he all along knew that the Empire was the only way to keep the Altmerry Dominion at bay, but he was very ineffective in appealing to many in Skyrim, and very ineffective in showing people in Skyrim why he did what he did and why he supported the Empire, with even Imperial supporters saying that he often rambled when trying to justify his actions vis-à-vis the Empire. He was known to have sympathy for Ulfric's cause of independence during his rule, as he highly respected Ulfric, with his court wizard even saying that if Ulfric had asked for independence, Torygg may have tried it at least. But Torygg wasn't really able to do anything, even if he had tried, and thus he failed to navigate well on the waves of discontent among the Jarls and demands of the Empire. He did not have the credibility among the Jarls to ask them for time and patience which his father had, and many saw him as a weak ruler and a puppet, and when he fell in love with Alicent and married her, he also spent a lot of time with her, his new wife, instead of ruling the province, and that definitely did not help his image either, although, wanting to spend time with the person you just married is understandable, but it's not the best thing for your image when the local rulers look at you to be a strong advocate for the province to a demanding empire, and they already have doubts about you. And so there came a breaking point where it seems that Ulfric lost any faith that he had in Torygg at the Moot, and he decided that there had to be a change in leadership. Ulfric then travelled to Solitude and requested an audience with Torygg, and during this audience, Ulfric invoked an ancient tradition where any Jarl could challenge the High King for kingship in a duel. It isn't super clear whether Ulfric actually expected to get the duel, as both he and Torygg knew that with Ulfric's power of the voice and his prowess in combat, Torygg didn't really stand a realistic chance against him, but if Torygg refused the duel, he would break with tradition and a new moot would have to be called to elect a new king. I think Ulfric have expected Torygg to refuse and to step down and to allow the moot to elect a new king, as both outcomes, so killing Torygg or him stepping down in shame, would send a message about the state of the High Kingship and the state of the province to the rest of the Jarls and the rest of the population. But Torygg didn't refuse the duel and instead faced Ulfric in combat. In his own words, he faced him fearlessly, knowing his fate was sealed but his honor intact. Torygg died during the duel, defeated with the ancient power of the voice, and he was killed by Ulfric, who would escape the city and now start his Stormcloak rebellion, earning the support of about half the Jarls of the province, and in the end, the player will decide whether or not it would result in independence for Skyrim or Ulfric's death and a full reunification with the Empire. But Torygg would see neither outcome on Tamriel, as his soul, having died in combat, would be sent to Sovngarde. Alright, so realistically, what's our verdict on Torygg? I personally see him as a bit of a tragic figure. He seems to have been quite young, younger than 30 most likely, when elected to become the leader of a province under strain, and with an extremely difficult political situation at his hands, with near open rebellion brewing, while the Empire was rebuilding after the war and demanded much of the provinces. He didn't have the credibility of his father, both with the Jarls and probably also with the Empire, which probably would also have taken his father more seriously if he had protested against anything that the Empire did. And I can't blame him for falling in love with Alicent and spending a lot of time with her, but maybe as High King in that political situation, it wouldn't be the most convenient thing to do, and led to even less credibility and more lost faith among the Jarls. Torygg understood those wanting independence, but he wasn't able to appeal to them and make them feel heard or make the necessary changes to calm their voices down. But I think his final action of not declining combat but doing the honorable thing of facing Ulfric instead of stepping down shows that at least he himself thought that he had honor and tried to do the thing which was right. even if he wasn't able to do so most of the time. He wasn't a great or effective king, and perhaps in a Skyrim in more peaceful and prosperous times, he would have been able to become a good and wise ruler, growing wise with years, just like his father had. But he came to the throne in a very difficult time, and I kind of feel for him, while at the same time also thinking, if even the Imperial supporting characters in Skyrim say that he wasn't a super great king and could have done more, well, then he probably was just the wrong man at the wrong time for Skyrim. And that is everything I could say about High King Torygg, and I hope that you enjoyed this video and that you learned something new about Elder Scrolls lore today. And if you did, why not give the video a like or a hype boost thing, whatever YouTube does nowadays. Also, this video is kind of a DLC to my recent long Skyrim from Ulfric's perspective video, so be sure to watch that if you haven't yet and if you want more context or just more Elder Scrolls lore in general. And now all that remains for me to be done is to vocally thank my top Patreon supporters. Mr. Bernardo Binda, Gabriel Binda, King Chris 20, Volkior Vargonia, RB Dash, Polycom, Baradermas, Lexicon, Sword of Bushido, Rakai, Spaceman, Ranger and James Lynch. It's thanks to these people and all the others on screen who are my lovely Patreon supporters and YouTube members that this channel stays alive and why I can take off time in my job to even make these Elder Scrolls lore videos. So huge thanks to them. Links are in the description if you want to join them and see your name on screen right now. With that being said, I will see all of you in the next Elder Scrolls lore video. Bye bye.